On May 9, 2022, the Philippines elected Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as president. He is the second Marcos to hold the post, the first being his father and namesake. The dictator was ousted from power on February 25, 1986, in what we now call the People Power Revolution. Here we try to answer the question, where is Philippine democracy heading 36 years after the revolution? Welcome to 36 Years, available on Rappler social media pages and on wherever you listen to podcasts. This week, we talked to Reyna Valmores, chairperson for Bahaghari and a lifelong advocate for LGBTQIA rights. I speak to her just as Congress, and I'm referring to both the House and the Senate. Lawmakers in those chambers use parliamentary tactics to derail the discussion, not even the passage lang, but the discussion of the long-awaited SOGIE Equality Bill. Behind those efforts, of course, are the father and son tandem of Representative Eddie Villanueva and Senator Joel Villanueva. In my discussion with Reyna, we talk about the resistance to SOGIE equality and efforts to promote equality in general, prospects for the long awaited bill in the 19th Congress under President Marcos, and what you, yes, you, whoever you are that's watching or listening to this, can do to help the movement. But first, a rundown of headlines you should check out this week if you're into that. A month after President Marcos's first state visit to China, tensions in the South China Sea heightened. On February 6, that's 2 days before Marcos flew to Japan for an official visit naman, a Chinese Coast Guard vessel aimed a military-grade laser at the BRP Malapascua in waters near Ayungin Shoal in the West Philippine Sea, or the part of the South China Sea that's under the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. The U.S. has since expressed support for the Philippines following the incident, and all of these events happen against the backdrop of rising tensions and competition between the US and China. Now, while in Japan, Marcos expressed openness to a visiting force agreement with Japan if it will protect Filipino fishermen and our maritime territory. Manila and Washington also recently announced that 4 military bases would be opened for access to American troops, including the preposition of their assets. Beijing expectedly did not react well to that. My colleague Sofia Toma Cruz has covered the newest incident. She also covered Marcos's official visit to Japan. She's also written extensively about the US-China dynamics and how the Philippines plays into that, so check out her stories. Also, the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council, that's quite a mouthful, lays out its 10 priority measures. Bills congressional leaders, as in the Senate President and the House Speaker, aim to pass before June 2 or the end of the 19th Congress's regular session. Important context dito, both chambers of Congress are dominated by a supermajority that's allied with President Marcos. So, quick rundown of these bills. Amendments to the BOT law or the PPP bill. This is something that Marcos and his economic team have spoken about in these various trips abroad, that they want to make sure that our laws are more conducive to investments from foreign investors. The Philippine Center for Disease Prevention and Control and the creation of the Virology Institute of the Philippines, that's a SONA promise by President Marcos. Returning ROTC as mandatory, that's another SONA promise by President Marcos. But I just want to highlight two things that are quite controversial in the list from the LEDAC. They're controversial for good reason. The push to make ROTC mandatory, again, there was actually a topic that I talked to Kabataan Representative Raul Manuel about in the last episode, and also the Maharlika Fund, which Marcos and his allies, including House Speaker Romualdez, have been pushing aggressively, both here in Manila, in the Philippines, and abroad. We have tons of articles about those specific bills and about the other bills that Marcos has been pushing, so make sure to check out Rappler.com. Now, on to my conversation with Reyna. Hi, Reyna. Thank you for joining us. I know it's quite a intense week. We're recording this actually on the 10th. So, diretso na tayo sa discussion. No? Parang the past week in Congress, in both chambers actually, hindi lang sa, initially yung balita kasi lumabas dun sa House of Representatives sa batasan, and then we discovered later on the same thing was happening in the Senate. Yung mag-amang Villanueva, one of them is a senator, the other is a representative, used in a way, weaponized or used procedural elements of Congress to, there's no other word for it, siguro, to block the SOGIE Equality Bill. Did this surprise you at all?
It didn't. Actually, we came into the hearing. We were expecting that, Villanueva would be there.
Yeah.
We sort of had an idea that there would be some shady things going on. We didn't know the specifics. Of course, it did still come as a shock, the actual arguments they made, because the truth is that technically they don't hold any water.
Yeah.
Pero yeah, it did come as a shock na talagang mayroong ganung efforts to delay the bill.
Yeah. Actually, parang kumbaga sa dalawang chamber, one argued it a little better or at least na-leverage yung power, referring to the Senator Villanueva kasi nga Rules Committee siya, no? Yung isang sinasite nila news, at least in the Senate, right? On account of the letters, the barrage of letters and communications they got from, I don't wanna generalize, for church groups, religious groups. Yung nasabi nga ni Senator Ontiveros, parang with the argument na kulang yung consultation. Her argument was, it's been more than 2 decades of consultation, referring to the repeated delay of any proposal for anti-discrimination. Hindi nga specific to SOGIE, pero just in general, anti-discrimination. Like, ano pa bang kulang? I mean, this is very rhetoric, no? Pero I just want a discussion on that. Like, what is happening? Why can't they give space for this?
Yeah. Well, that's one thing. I'm glad you mentioned that you don't want to generalize church groups.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're talking about the fundamentalist groups na talagang dedicated sila na any form of women's rights and LGBT rights are being blocked, not just with the SOGIE bill, halimbawa, when it comes to divorce, when it comes to abortion, etc.
Yeah.
Notably also, these are church groups that are backed by the political machinery of certain political dynasties.
Yeah.
Now, as to why this is the case, I think, syempre, may factor yun na, and frankly, I think it's quite sad na, like, looking at the two Villanuevas, father and son, it was a clear, malicious, and premeditated delaying tactic. It's clear that it was planned beforehand.
Yeah.
And I think it's, for lack of better term, pathetic. Like, could you imagine devoting your political career to just ensuring other people don't get equal rights as others? Part of it has to do with religion, but more so weaponizing religion. And I think another thing that's missing, we try to zoom into the two Villanuevas, right? And rightfully so. But even before that, we've had people like Tito Soto who promised to do everything to block the bill. I think what's missing here is that the real politique of Philippine politics, right? There's what we call a supermajority. Each time a president gets elected, whatever the president wants to happen will happen.
Yeah.
Because of that supermajority both in Congress and the Senate. So really, having 23 plus years of the SOGIE bill being heard and still being rejected over and over again, it's symptomatic of having decades of administrations who have never made LGBT rights a priority.
Right.
And so I guess that's one big question we have now for the current administration.
I mean, definitely President Marcos, even as a candidate, was woefully opaque, I guess is the generous term of what his plans were from the economy. Diba? But it was just a broad promise of sama-sama tayong babangon muli. But beyond that, the specifics weren't there. I mean, especially when it came to LGBTQIA rights, arguably even women's rights, children's rights. Like, it wasn't exactly clear where he stood or where he was going in that way, no?
Exactly. And I think that's putting it very generously. Kasi nga, he didn't have a plan. Let's state it bluntly. He didn't have a plan.
Yeah.
And, it's 7 months into his office. He's been into several countries.
Yeah.
ano ba yun, paikot-ikot na lang siya, hindi na lang niya sasagutin yung mga issue natin. So, that's hanging.
Yeah. Very important din yung pag-point out mo na hindi lang na it's the religious movement in the Philippines that's blocking this, but it's very important nga to point out na it's not just the religious groups, but the fact na the religious groups are tied to political groups or coalitions. They're barely parties, frankly. And tied rin yun sa dynasties. And we're not just talking about the Villanuevas, obviously, pero I mean, Congress is practically
it's a family business.
It's a family business. Yung tanong ko dito, you like, I don't know if this is generalizing, but your life's work, no? Parang at this point in your young life, it's devoted to LGBTQIA rights, equality. How do you even begin to fight for that, knowing that that's what you're up against, right? Like it's not just it's a system na parang layer upon layer of like people who refuse to budge and people who actually frankly refuse to even listen and hear.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think it starts with being human. You know, my experience bilang transgender na babae na in the Philippines, parang the most abnormal version of bakla. Parang the most extreme version of bakla. Siguro I want to share some of my experiences nga and it's like a daily thing also for other women na when you walk in the street, biglang may magka-catcall, diba? I'm sure it's the experience of so many women. Sa akin, minsan, if I feel like hindi ako nagpa-pass, baka may mag-jeer pa na, uy, may bakla, may bakla. And so, having those things constantly hitting you every day, and seeing the bigger and more painful versions of these things. Halimbawa, there are people around the country, we always hear about it, losing their jobs, nag-a-apply sa trabaho, hindi pinapasok kasi bakla, kinailangan magpakalalaki para makapasok sa trabaho, hindi naka-apply sa scholarship kasi yung pananamit ay ganito o ganyan. Or in the worst case, people losing their lives to hate crime, people like Jennifer Laude. I think it starts from being human. This is your experience, and this is the experience of so many people. And there may be some of us who would be, trying to just survive it. But most certainly, there will be people who will try to change it. And so it's only natural that throughout the country, even though we're a very conservative country, there's I would say hundreds of LGBT organizations, both at the community level, in schools, NGOs, in every other form. And it's a symptom of people wanting to come together because they're tired of this. We're tired of this kind of system, and you're right. It's not a joke. Trying to change it, it's a massive thing. In fact, yung SOGIE Equality Bill is just a first step. Kasi nga, it's just a law that says you won't be discriminated. The truth is, bare minimum yun.
I know, it's literally on the floor lang siya na,
Right? So it's I would call it protracted, no? Mahabaan ang laban. So, kailangan mo talagang kumapit sa pag-asa and sa pagiging tao na ayaw nating may mga kapwa pa tayo at pati sa sarili natin, ayaw nating maranasan na ang ganitong kultura. So that's sort of how I try to look at things.
We discussed nga about how the administration on paper, magkaiba yung admin, yung Malacanang is separate from Congress, but in reality, it's a super majority, both houses, both chambers rather. And again, like we were discussing kanina, parang hindi malinaw kung ano ba talaga ang stand ni President Marcos on a lot of things, but especially when it comes to SOGIE, equality, LGBTQIA rights in general, it's not very well explained or ano pa. Pero so at this point though, like looking at the map of the 19th Congress and even not necessarily just Congress, no, pero in government in general, do we have allies? Do we have heroes whom like can perhaps find a way to kahit man lang inch the movement forward?
Right. Actually, there have been many allies, including now, when it comes to the SOGIE bill. Halimbawa na, there are actually a whopping 9 versions of the SOGIE Equality Bill. So 9 different people filing their own versions of the SOGIE Equality Bill. And it points to having people, at least on a personal level, in Congress at least, na interesado na magkaroon tayo ng ganitong panukala. The same goes for the Senate. Actually, for the committee, there were 19 signatures. Although some of them were raising that we still have some questions about the bill clarification. But it's kind of visible that there are people who are willing to take it up, and there's many of them. Yung missing piece talaga, it really goes back to what we're talking about. If the administration and the president himself has the political will, it will happen. Kung 23 years nang dinidinig ang SOGIE bill, nothing is happening. Pero if the president wants mandatory ROTC, parang ilang araw lang dinidinig na yung hanggang sa dulo. If president wants team registration, biglang isa sa batas kaagad yan.
Maharlika.
So, exactly.
Yeah.
So again, in fact, I wouldn't just say it's hanging. That's what I said earlier. I think the continued silence of President Marcos is really belies not just how he disregards the LGBT community, like how this is not a priority to him at all. I remember during the election period, etong si Marcos, nag-attend pa siya ng isang Pride March.
Yeah.
And then I remember that. And then parang ang ano lang, I'm sure there have been many members of the LGBT community who voted for him. And I can only imagine how painful it must be, putting your faith in someone to push for your legislative agenda only for him to abandon you. In fact, he's literally not in the Philippines right now.
Yeah.
And I think another thing I do want to add, unique ang administration na ito in the sense na diba, in the past, the vice president has historically just been seen as a spare tire. But now, the vice president is the child of the previous president.
Yeah.
It's Sara Duterte. She's also the secretary of the Department of Education. She has been vested with an egregious amount of funds that are not even auditable. So I would argue this is the most powerful any vice president has been.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring this up is Sara Duterte is the Secretary of the Department of Education. What's happening now in relation to LGBT persons, dahil nga we're in the middle of the pandemic, we're starting to recover, quote unquote. Naturally, nagsisimula na rin ang face-to-face schooling.
Yeah.
And now in Bahaghari, we're monitoring tons of cases where LGBT kids are facing discrimination at school. Yung mga dati na mga trans nene, dahil online, nagpapahaba sila ng buhok. Pero dahil bumalik na sa school, biglang di na sila pinapag-aaral unless they cut their hair.
Yeah.
The thing is that we already have a memo in DepEd that supposedly protects LGBT students, but that is not being implemented or upheld.
Yeah.
And that's something that Sara Duterte, someone who's very empowered as a VP now, has to answer for.
Yeah.
So really, the Marcos administration, both Marcos and Duterte, it's becoming more and more clear na talagang walang pakialam sa mga miyembro ng LGBT.
Yeah. I mean, to add to the vice president, she leaned quite heavily also on LGBT support.
Exactly.
Like, through an organization that might be of a different whatever. Pero di ba, parang it was really something that she pushed forward. And not just that, parang marami siyang hinighlight na programs as Davao City Mayor in support of...
Right.
But you're right, parang meron ngang strange silence or selective silence at least from both the president and the vice president when it matters, frankly, in Congress. May isa din akong tanong na parang yung argument nila, yung nila covers a lot of people from Twitter, in Congress, even in real life. Yung argument nila is that we are not ready. I'm not sure who they're referring to. So we Is it a generational divide? I'm not sure. Is it a actual political divide? But I'd argue na as a whole, or at least from my biased perspective as someone who is a little younger and who lives on the internet, we are ready, or if not, we should be ready. But my question is like, saan na tayo nga ba sa puntong yon? Like, how do you even like concretize that idea? Sino si we? What is ready?
Right.
How do you know when
Exactly.
we're ready? Or like, yun nga, pero balik tayo sa argument dun na, but we should be ready. If we're not ready, then we should find a way
Exactly.
to be ready. Yeah.
Exactly. Kumbaga, the question itself, it's like paradoxical.
Yeah.
Kasi we're talking about human rights.
Yeah.
Paano yun? We're just gonna allow violence to happen because the overwhelming majority of people participate in a conservative mindset or conservative culture.
Yeah.
Following that logic, wag na lang tayo mag-advance as a nation.
Yeah.
Napakarami pang
Yeah.
mga backward na mga ideas natin na predominant. Hindi tayo ready. And I like what you mentioned nga na bakit magiging usapan itong pagiging ready? The point nga is we have to make people ready. If we know what's right,
Yeah.
we need to advocate for it to our very bones,
Yeah.
di ba? Kasi alam natin yun yung tama.
Yeah.
And again, we're not even talking about crazy, supposedly radical ideas
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
We're talking about a law that
Yeah.
protects people against discrimination.
Yeah.
If we're just going by the lens of national development, hindi ba napakalaki na agad ng strides natin as a country if we ensure that every child has their potential reached?
Yeah.
Kasi alam nila na walang kinalaman ang haba ng buhok nila, walang kinalaman kung sino yung minamahal nila.
Yeah.
Nakakayahan nila na mag-contribute sa lipunan.
Yeah.
And again, it's just a very baseline thing.
Yeah.
Hindi pa nga natin pinag-uusapan yung marriage equality.
Yeah,
Hindi pa nga natin pinag-uusapan yung
Yeah.
iba pang mga bagay na nagsislippery slope na itong ilang mga kongresista.
Yeah, yeah. It's really terrifying. What's terrifying to me is that they're using parang conservatism, quote unquote. I don't know what that means to them, to these people. Pero parang ginagamit nilang camouflage for what is essentially cruelty. And then it's personally terrifying to me. And I mean, I come from a very privileged space in that aspect, no. Pero it's terrifying that yun nga parang under the guise of being a conservative, being a religious person, in essence, it's cruelty to fellow Filipinos.
Yeah, and just to add, no, kasi kanina we were talking na we want to qualify it as the religious fundamentalists who are making noise. Kasi there are plenty of churches as it is right now in the Philippines who are in full support of the SOGIE Equality Bill. There are even churches who hold ceremonies for same-sex couples.
Yeah.
So it's not religion per se.
Yeah.
Religion is not the problem here. Kasi nga, you have people of faith who are standing for equality. And in fact, you know, I was raised as a Roman Catholic, pero nga, even just basic reading about, you know, kasi nga we're talking about Bible thumpers, just reading about, sorry for the term.
Yeah.
Reading about the history, the stories of Jesus Christ, how he has compassion for people who are suffering. I would argue, you know, if Jesus were here, he would be the first one to say, these people are suffering. We need to protect them.
Yeah.
So to be holy, to be a person of faith, is to stand for equality, to stand for laws like the SOGIE Equality Bill.
Yeah.
So again, goes back to what I was saying. On a deeper level, it's not religion per se that's the problem. The problem is we have governance that views the LGBT community as something that's not even politically useful. Maybe to a certain extent in campaigns, such as what Sara Duterte did. Even what President Marcos' sister did, si Amy Marcos, when she said, iboto natin ang totoong bakla sa Senado. It boils down to that. Diba? It's still down to the people in power refusing to give us even the barest minimum of our rights.
Right. Given kumbaga the mapping of Congress and also the not just like the two branches that more or less dictate where proposed laws go, What's the prospects for SOGIE equality in the 19th Congress under President Marcos?
I'm not going to lie. Right now, it's looking grim.
Yeah.
Kasi nga, well, on the level of Congress, mukhang na-foil kahit papaano ang attempt ni Villanueva, ni Brother Villanueva. But in the Senate, it's frankly going to be nearly impossible kasi it got moved to the Committee on Rules. Now the chair of the Committee on Rules is Senator Villanueva. So he could just choose to delay it however he wants. But I think one thing I want to add here, maybe there's also a part of us that looking at the push for laws in a manner that's a little bit too dependent on the whims of people in power. I think just like many other rights, halimbawa, having a 7-day work week, having an 8-hour workday, having wages being raised. A lot of those things were fought for in history. And I think the same is going to be true for LGBT rights in the Philippines, whether it's a local anti-discrimination ordinance or a national anti-discrimination bill or any other policy. It's going to be a fight. And so it's going to be given. You have these politicians, mga trapo yan eh. Papaling lang yan sa kung saan sila magkaka-interest. I think the ultimately decisive factor is the collective action of people who really want change to happen. So my faith is being placed on all the people speaking out, all the advocates, all the organizations coming together to continuously make noise and eventually pressure these people into having this discussion and eventually passing this law, legislating this law in the Philippines.
Final question na lang. What really worries me whenever I open social media, because I always come in thinking, there's hope for the world, and then I open social media and I see bigotry. Yun nga parang nagiging funny na lang siya in a dark and sad way that when you open Twitter, suddenly like, where did you come from? Like, ang daming anti-SOGIE na mali naman yung pagkaintindi sa batas. But what I worry about is if let's say a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old opens Twitter and sees that, he might think that, this is how the world sees me. How, like, what are resources they can tap, siguro, to feel a little less alone and maybe even to help the movement, even if they're not yet of voting age?
Right. Actually, I kind of touched on it and implicitly talked about it. That's the value of forming organizations. Kasi your organization is the expression of people's collective action. Whether that's a support group, just people trying to comfort each other. The world is rough, diba? Whether it's just, halimbawa, something like a K-pop interest group. They have a desire for something. They're collectively working towards it. Ako, personally, just yung experience ko growing up, dahil nga, I was confused nung lumalaki ako. I would often, kasi conservative ang family ko, I would often face domestic violence kapag nagbabakla-bakla ako. So, yung nangyayari before, tahimik lang talaga ako. When I was at school, sinusumbong kasi ng teachers ko sa magulang ko na yung anak mo nagpapakababae, ganyan. So I was literally too anxious to speak. Like pag mag-recite, I could not speak kasi feeling ko kung magsalita ako, baka masabi ko in a feminine way, may mangyari na naman sa bahay. And the sad thing is that my experience is not unique. It is the experience of so many other LGBT kids around the country. But I was fortunate enough to have found an organization. And, sometimes it still surprises me, looking back, na I was some kid who was too anxious to even recite. And now I'm joining plenty of people in the country now fighting for the rights of the LGBT community and other people as well who are suffering. there's so much potential in all of us. And I think that can be unlocked if we work together through an organization.
Yeah.
So to anyone, to any young LGBT kid questioning yourself, feeling like you can't contribute anything, you can.
Yeah.
And you can contribute it. You can contribute, the things that you can in the most effective way if we channel all our energies and all our potentials together.
Yeah.
So you can join an organization like Bahaghari. You can
Yeah.
form an organization in your school, in your workplace. We can make this happen. We can make the SOGIE Equality Bill happen, as well as so many other things.
Yeah.
A bright future is ahead of us if we
Yeah.
continue to fight for it.
Yeah, I'll ask you for links. I'll link them in the story for this interview so that kung may makinig, may manood, and they want to actually check out, join Bahaghari or any other organization, they'll have an easier way to find that. And that's a good message nga na parang for better or worse, more for the worse, batasan or even the Senate, they don't actually reflect how the real Filipino is, and that I think that speaks a lot about how flawed our politics, our elected politics is in the Philippines. Thank you so much, Reyna, for your time. Thank you for your hard
Thank you
work.
so much.
And
Thank you so much for
especially
having
thank you
me.
for your optimism and your perseverance, no? Despite the bigotry that surrounds you, especially in the highest levels of power. So thank you for that, and thank you for talking to me.
That has been this week's episode of 36 Years. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Rain, and I hope, like me, you came out of it with some optimism that's grounded in realism. Because, again, like Reina discussed or talked about in our conversation, she's quite realistic about the prospects for the SOGIE Equality Bill under the current Congress or under the circumstances of the current legislative world in the Philippines. But we will be linking to resources from Reina if you want to be more involved or if you want to learn more about the push for SOGIE equality and equality in general. Again, this has been Cupin. You've been watching 36 Years. I hope you also check out Rappler's other shows. We cover everything from politics, news, sports, lifestyle, K-pop. I'll see you again next week. Bye.